Greetings, programs, and welcome to another episode of Thumb Wars Presents Blistered Reviews. I'm your host, Sean Carterfeld, and on this episode, we're going to be taking a look at the long-anticipated release, Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, from joint developers Level 5 and Capcom, and publisher Nintendo. Yes, two of the great modern adventure game franchises have teamed up, and now we're going to find out whether or not it's an objectionable product. Take that!
Wow, Professor, this is amazing.
Objection! Hang on!
The time has come at last to settle this once and for all.
For those of us who live in North America, it's been an epic wait indeed for the release of Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. Originally released in Japan for 3DS all the way back in November 2012, the avid fans' patience was further tested by talk that the game might end up being Japan only, with both Capcom and Level 5 going so far as to hold multiple polls to judge the viability of localization. Even as late as last July, both developers were keeping information on the possible release of the game outside of Japan close to the vest, and all of which led to an upswell in fervor for the title among fans of both series the world over. Finally, however, in August 2013, Layton vs. Wright was officially confirmed for international release by no less than Nintendo, who also announced they'd be handling publisher duties as well. So it was that the game reached European shores March of this year, with its North American release at last arriving this week. However, one important question remains. Does the game itself turn out to have been worth the lengthy waiting period, or can it simply not live up to all the hype? The good. Story, characters, gameplay, visuals, audio, anime cutscenes, upcoming DLC. The bad. Some familiar puzzles, lack of either extended cast. The ugly. Dear, sweet, stupid Emir Punchenbog. You never failed to both amuse and horrify. One of the interesting things about Layton vs. Wright is that the game is really the last chance for players to experience either series as they were during their first initial heyday. Indeed, for Layton fans, this might just be their final opportunity to join the good professor in some puzzle solving, what with Level 5 CEO Akira Hino firmly declaring that Professor Layton and the Azeron Legacy, which it's worth noting was released after Layton vs. Wright in Japan, would be the last Layton title to star Layton as the protagonist. And while the Ace Attorney series seems to be in the middle of getting its second wind at the moment, the fact that Layton vs. Wright features Phoenix and Maya from the height of their partnership in the initial Ace Attorney trilogy also offers a chance for AA fans to return to a dynamic that will likely never be otherwise explored in depth again in the series. All of which means that the whole crossover element in play in Layton vs. Wright is not the only reason for fans to be interested in the game, and it's fortunate then that the title offers an experience worthy of both series' good names. Since the story of Layton vs. Wright is the strongest element, I won't go too much into detail on the whys and wherefores of what brings our four heroes together. I will at least comment that don't let the verses in the title fool you, because Layton and Phoenix are anything but at odds throughout the majority of the game's 20 to 25 hour story. Indeed, some of you may even remember seeing what looked like story cutscenes from one of the game's earliest trailers, where the two talk with their respective partners about how they don't like or trust the other man. But I'm here to tell you that that's all pure bupkis, and indeed neither conversation ever even actually occurs in-game. And honestly, that's for the best, since one of the great joys of Layton vs. Wright is seeing how its four leads play off of each other in a variety of ways. During the course of the game, the usual pairings are broken apart and remixed again and again, and it all adds up to a story that actually manages to take the leads in some interesting and unusual directions. Phoenix in particular gets a real long dark night of the soul moment late in the game, as he gets pushed about as far to the edge as he has at any point we've previously seen. And that's saying something. Beyond our leads, the magical land of Labyrinthia, which makes for the game's central setting, is a worthy addition to both series canon, thanks to a diverse cast of new characters. The game's main rival prosecutor, or Inquisitor as they're called in Labyrinthia, is a red-haired knight by the name of Zacharias Barnaham, and he makes for a worthy enough foe in the courtroom. He's no Edgeworth or Godot, mind you, but he still manages to be about 100 times more interesting than Clavier ever was, and that's all I can really ask for. Plus, he's only one of a number of interesting and well-developed opponents featured over the course of Layton vs. Wright, and all who help make the game's already well-written story all the stronger. Beyond them, a number of other supporting players further flesh out Labyrinthia nicely, and all in all, it feels like an appropriately Layton-esque setting. Of course, for one particular Ace Attorney, being teleported into a land of magic and witches is far more off-putting, but then good old Nick is always at his best the more out of his depth and his comfort zone he is. It's a feature, not a bug, in other words. The only real downside to Labyrinthia is the fact that its usage as a central setting, along with the City of London in the game's opening hours, means that essentially all of the extended Ace Attorney cast, and most of the Professor Layton cast as well, are absent from the proceedings. And while I can understand why some might be disappointed by not getting another chance to hang out with, say, Gumshoe, Flora, Don Paulo, or Francisca, it's understandable why the developers would choose to keep the game focused on each series' primary leads. There's already a lot of story to unwind as it is in Layton vs. Wright, and adding even more characters for potential newcomers to get caught up on and keep track of could have easily become a bridge too far. Overall, Layton vs. Wright features an exciting and engaging story that should satisfy players from start to finish and likely leave them wishing this team-up could become a more regular affair. In gameplay terms, Layton vs. Wright is a near-perfect split down the middle of the kind of puzzle-solving and lawyering that has made each series famous. The game features two modes of play, adventuring and witch trials. The latter in general plays out like fans of the Ace Attorney series have come to expect from court battles, although there are a few key changes to help keep everything feeling fresh. The biggest of these is the fact that players will often have to interrogate multiple witnesses at once, and while in general this simply means that each witness gets a line each per cross-examination period, the game does take advantage of the mechanic throughout. Players will often need to watch how one witness reacts to what another says, for example, and they'll also even be able to use one statement against another to point out a contradiction. The witch trials are wild affairs, what with them existing in a medieval world where concepts like fingerprints, photographs, and DNA testing don't exist, and even the basic concept of logic is largely unheard of. Trials in Ace Attorney games tend to be unbalanced against defendants anyways, but the witch trials take this idea to a whole nother level. Rarely has Phoenix had the deck so thoroughly stacked against him, which, again, is saying something, and it helps make the three witch trials in Layton vs. Wright memorable additions to the Ace Attorney casebook. When not having players fighting for the lives of friends in court, the game enters adventure mode, which follows the Layton formula down to the T. Players will travel to various locations via an overworld map, wherein they will interact with others and move the story forward, generally by solving a wide variety of puzzles. Ace Attorney fans should prepare themselves for a complete lack of such elements as cyclocks, presenting evidence outside of court, and so on. While not in court, Layton rules are king, but it's close enough to the usual AA shenanigans that fans of that series should not find the transition too jarring. Well, once they get used to solving seemingly random puzzles at the drop of a hat, that is. And speaking of the game's puzzles, if Layton vs. Wright has a weak link in its gameplay, it's here. This is not to say the game's puzzles are bad or anything, it's just that many of them are basically puzzles seen in past Layton titles with a fresh coat of paint. This was also a problem in the last couple mainline Layton games as well, and it's likely the biggest reason Level 5 has chosen to shut down the series for now. Still, at least those truly exhausted with the Layton series brand of puzzles can comfort themselves with the knowledge that Layton vs. Wright features only 70 puzzles compared to the 140 or so of a regular Layton title. And if you're either new to the Layton series or simply can't get enough puzzles in your life, I want to stress that the puzzles in Layton vs. Wright, when taken on their own terms, remain high quality and well-designed challenges. Generally, any game that Level 5 is involved with these days is going to at the very least look gorgeous, and Layton vs. Wright is certainly no exception. Both the environments and the characters are detailed and filled with small touches and extra animations. This actually marks the first time Phoenix would go 3D, and it's just another example of how leaving the beloved old school sprites behind allows for more cinematic courtroom battles. As one would expect from a Layton game, there are also numerous 2D animated cutscenes, and these are practically worth the price of admission on their own, particularly during the more action-packed moments of the game. Orally, the title also shines with what might just be the best soundtrack to grace either a Layton or Ace Attorney game to date. Featuring both arranged and orchestrated pieces, the soundtrack includes familiar tunes for both series, strong new compositions, and, most excitingly for me at least, pieces that mix the themes of both series together to form a brilliant new whole. All in all, the game features over 90 tracks of music, and don't be surprised if you come away from playing it with a burning need to add another soundtrack to your collection. Finally, Layton vs. Wright's voice acting is similarly top-notch, although Phoenix does have a different voice actor from the one used in Dual Destinies and Marvel vs. Capcom 3, owing to Nintendo using the UK localization for release. Still, Nick's new voice is similar enough that it shouldn't create any dissonance for players. Layton vs. Wright is something of a true rarity, at least in the game industry. Crossover between two properties from two different publishers/developers, where both companies were equally involved in the development process. Perhaps then it's the specific nature of this collaboration that accounts for just how smoothly the character, story, gameplay, and even visuals of both series meld together to create a mostly seamless whole. Then again, both the Layton and Ace Attorney series have always had a great deal in common, including both being adventure games with twists that feature exploration sections from a first-person perspective, and even down to the fact that both series' main heroes have a thing about making excited exclamations while thrusting a single finger forward. Really, having Herschel Layton and Phoenix Wright team up is less like mixing peanut butter and chocolate, and more like mixing peanut butter and jelly. Their two complementary tastes that is anything but surprising to learn goes together well. Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney is simultaneously a must-play for fans and an excellent entry point into either or both series, particularly for fans of one that has not played the other. Score, 8 out of 10, awesome. Recommendation, buy it now. And that's going to do it for another episode of Blistered Reviews. I hope to see you back here this Saturday when I'll be presenting the latest episode of Thumb Wars, The Fall of the Tomb Raider. And so, until then, happy gaming.